If we look in the Marco, the description of plurilingual competence, which is being heavily promoted these days through many bilingual schools and so on, this is interesting to see what they define it in section 1.3 as involving the ability to use a variety of languages flexibly, switching from one to another, expressing yourself in one language and understanding another, using knowledge of various languages to make sense of a text, recognizing words from a common international store when they're extended in a new form or a new meaning, to mediate between people whose language you don't speak, even if you only have a little knowledge of that language yourself, to bring everything you've got into play when you're trying to express yourself in a new code, and also all the wonderful things you can do with paralinguistics, mime, gesture, etc. I'm so very fond of helping my students to express themselves through body language, as I'm sure you are too. So that's plurilingual competence. Let's look at another example. If the students ask you, profe, ¿cómo se dice tolerar? Or similar in Portuguese. How do you say tolerar in English? Or continuar, or separar, or impedir? What would you give your students? With our Spanish or Portuguese speaking classes, which would you teach first at the levels I'll show you in a second? Would you teach put up with or tolerate? Go on, carry on, or continue? Split up with or separate? Hold back or impede, restrict? At these levels there, which would you teach at A1 if they say, how do you say tolerar? How do you say hold back? How do you say, how do you say separar? Sorry. What would you teach? At A1, which would you go for? Put up with or tolerate? How about A2? And B1, which would you choose? Put up with or tolerate? I look forward to seeing your answers when I watch this video with you later. My answer is A1, tolerate. A2, tolerate. B1, tolerate. Why? Because they can use it immediately. They don't have any problems at all about meaning, very few pronunciation issues, and off they go. How many of your students at A1, A2 or B1 can honestly use put up with, or split up with, or hold back, or go on, or carry on? It strikes me as we're giving the more difficult form because we're still thinking about monolingual nativism, sorry. We're trying to sort of worship at the native temple, and there are all sorts of reasons why we shouldn't do that, but primarily because it's simple and it's usable and they can get on with it straight away, and we don't need to dwell on all the problems which phrasal verbs bring. And if you look, going back to these classifications of word frequency, they're both the same. They're both B2 words. These two are both B1. These two are both B1 too. So you can, according to the criteria which are used elsewhere to discriminate words, you can choose. Do you want to teach split up with or separate? I know which I prefer to teach. Sorry, I'm just getting a message. Oh no, I'm not, sorry. I thought I was getting a message. Hold back or impede. It's interesting. If you look in the Cambridge English vocabulary profile, hold back isn't even there. Neither is impede, only restrict, and that's a C1 word. So my feeling is that if you can possibly avoid phrasal verbs at the earlier levels and give them something they can use straight away, surely they're going to have more confidence, more fluency, and be able to use that language broadly. Okay? Let's have a look at one more question before I go to that. Is if the students ask you, teacher, what does put up with mean? In one word, what would you say? You would say tolerate. So you simplify it for them when they want the meaning. Why not simplify it for them when they want to actually use the words too? And if you were teaching in China, which would you teach? Would you give them put up with or tolerate? And my answer is, I really don't care because we're not teaching in China. We're teaching in Latin America, and our job is to simplify the process and accelerate the process as much as possible for our learners. Okay, so, and then I love that image, the idea of building on existing knowledge, because that's the essence of language teaching. We need to build on what they know. That's why we have levels: level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And we also know our learners so well, we can have a context-specific approach, beginning with their existing knowledge. We know they'll understand tolerate, continue, and impede, for example. So here are some options, some easier, more feasible initial options to complex phrasal verbs. I've just brainstormed a few there for you. There are many, many more. Have a look at them. Which is easier and more feasible for our students? Blow up or explode? Bring up or mention? Get across or communicate? Make up for or compensate? Take in or deceive? We know which they'll understand. We know which they could probably use. And yet, too many of us, for the wrong reasons, we still think, oh, we have to teach the phrasal form first because that's what a native would say. Well, I'm not convinced. I want my students, keep it simple, because your students will get there more quickly. And of course, so much of language learning is confidence-based. If they keep losing confidence because it's too difficult, when we could make it simple, are we really doing the right thing by our students? I'm not sure. And then if you start looking around for cognates, you can find a hell of a lot. Look at all these. For example, I've just circled all the verbs which you can use. I would take a screenshot of that if I was you. All of those verbs, you can give instructions. So I've observed hundreds and hundreds of classes of Romance language learners around the world. That's one of my jobs, to observe and give feedback. And it's a privilege because you learn so much more by observing in many ways than you do by teaching. And often you see teachers struggling with instructions, so they quickly switch into Spanish or Portuguese to give the instructions. And I spend a lot of my time just noting down what they've said and then finding ways to express what they said in their own language using this sort of language. And it's very easy, I think, to get, once you get into the habit of using cognates, you can express an awful lot. Look at all that grammatical terminology as well, all of which is available to our students. If you say it slowly, generate. So the first time, just say it slowly. The second time, say it more quickly, and the students will come with you and they'll comprehend. So when you start looking for cognates, it's amazing what you can find. Let's go back to the Marco, the Common European Framework. Word level allocation generally has been a combination of word frequency data, which is wonderful, all the beautiful things that corpora bring, and experts matching them to the descriptors in the framework. Again, a wonderful thing. But, there's often a but, it's still a generalization about what is broadly relevant to the average learner. But we're not teaching average learners. We're teaching clearly identifiable, L1 specific, context specific Latinos. And so are we best off working with generalizations, or should we be more specific? And then if we think about it, Latinos learning English is very different from Latinos learning Chinese. Which are they going to learn more quickly? Clearly Chinese, for all the advantages that we know. And Latinos learning English is very different from Chinese students learning English. Our students can understand and potentially use literally thousands of words without much effort. That does not apply to learners from whose mother tongue is Chinese, for example. So I do think we're holding students back by not being much more specific to what we could do and can do and should do with them a lot more quickly. The labels in the Common European Framework are principled, research-based criteria to inform and guide, but not to dictate vocabulary selection. And as I say, many of these labels would be disputed by different organizations, publishers, dictionaries, and so on. And if you actually look inside the framework itself, it tells us to expand, adapt, and omit according to context, learners' own languages, and local relevance and utility. So it's in the framework. We should be doing this. We should be adapting. We should be changing things according to our specific situation. But all too often, you see students following the same linguistic diet, the same materials diet in Chile and China, in Turkey and up in Mexico, or right across the world. We still get these international approaches rather than these L1 specific approaches. Recognizing and adapting differences to context is absolutely essential to successful teaching and learning. I'm sure, again, you would all agree with that, but is it what we're doing on a regular basis? Our goal, remember, is not to create mini native speakers, but effective communicators in internationally intelligible English as a lingua franca, using all their linguistic resources to interact globally. Okay, and we know our students are Latinos. And so a quick question for you, just a little mini quiz. 3 questions. What percentage of English teachers globally are not native speakers? How many English users are there in the world using it as a first, second, third or foreign language? And how many Romance language users are there in the world as well? I'll just give you a second to think about that, have a guess. Maybe type in your answers into the chat box and we'll see what you're saying. Okay, time's up. So here we go. It's amazing. Somewhere between 90 and 95% of English teachers globally are not native speakers. They're non-native. The only reason we can't be more specific is nobody knows quite how many teachers of English there are in China, for example. How many people use English globally? Well, David Crystal in a broadcast last week said it's about 2.3 billion now. It's not rising as much as it was, but that's about where we are now. So it's over a quarter of the world. But, and this is my point, there are at least 1.5 billion Romance language users, all of whom would understand tolerate more than put up with, all of whom would understand impede more than hold back, for example. So my arguments apply to our students, but also the way the students are going to use English globally. The chances of being understood with a phrasal verb are significantly lower in general than using the Latinate forms, which I've just been looking at, because of the numbers. Look at the numbers. Our students are much more likely to be comprehensible to the world using the more formal, if you like, the more Latinate term than phrasal verbs. I'm not suggesting for a minute we shouldn't teach them. There's a big difference between comprehension and production. But whenever the students ask for a word, when they want to produce it, then surely it's better to give them the one that they can use straight away until, I would say, at least a B1 level. And across Latin America, an awful lot of students don't need to get beyond B1 before they finish college, university, or whatever. Going back to this question, as I said, the best thing you can do when the students ask you those questions is simply respond, guess. Whenever you know that there's a cognate at the end of the rainbow, just say, guess, guess. And they may tolerate, tolerant, tolerant. Good. Tolerate. Correct. Good. Teach the rest of the class. The students can find it. And the more they guess, the more they get used to anglicizing words, the better, to my mind. Sometimes they'll be incomprehensible when they hit a non-cognate, for example, but it's still a key life skill. And you see people doing this on your travels around the world, trying to create English. And it's a magical thing. It can foster positive transfer. And when it doesn't work, oh, I tried. It creates a memorable experience and can alert students to significant differences. And it feels great too, the ability to communicate quite complex ideas with a word or two which is similar to your mother tongue is immensely satisfying and motivating. And as I've said before, going back to that lovely image, a principal tenet of cognitive psychology and any teaching method, whether you're teaching yoga or whether you're teaching cookery or whatever, is to build on existing knowledge. That's how we learn. And this is perhaps more controversial, but it's my experience teaching for 40 years plus in Romance language situations. Facility for L1 speakers is often just as important as corpora classification.